ruin the Korbon Pesach. This is a very interesting idea of what's a Mishnah Rishona, what's a Mishnah Achrona. Anybody know? We have halacha here. This is the Chetzi Eved in Korbon Pesach. This was an interesting status that could technically work. Instead of having a convert to Judaism fully, he'll become an Eved Kanani. Someone has to own him at that point. But then again, a lot of, let's say, Western countries have laws against slavery on the books, so we can't really do such a thing. But technically speaking, Eved Kanani is less an idea of ownership and more about conversion. It's a halachic status. A Jew who doesn't have to keep all of the mitzvahs. As the Rambam says, he's left Kahal Goyim, but he hasn't joined Kahal Yisrael. Okay, so there's categories what he can do, what he can't do. But he's obligated to keep certain commandments. So here we have a Mishnah, right at the beginning of the 8th parak of the Mishnayos, where it says Chetzio. There should be only one yod, but this is taken from Machon Mamre. Chetzio Eved v'Chetzio ben Chorin lo yochal mishal rabo. Normally, the master, he's in charge of arranging Korbon Pesach for those in his household. So he has a wife, he has children who are ketanim, and he has avodim ketanim. He has avodim kananim, shifcha kanainis. So normally the master is responsible for his Eved Kanani, and it's assumed that Eved Kanani will eat, unless there's a prior arrangement, he will eat of his master's Korbon Pesach. Now the Eved Kanani can be a grown man. He could be a 40-year-old man, and his master can be a 50-year-old man. But the master, the Jewish master, has to arrange for the Eved Kanani, and by the way, many other things he has to arrange for his Eved Kanani. And it says here that if you'd have a fellow who's somehow been half-half, what happened? He had two masters, joint ownership. One master emancipated him, so now he's half-free. The other master has not yet emancipated him. So the Mishnah says if you have a person, this says status, he's half-half, or what I call a half-slave, lo yochal mishal rabo. He cannot eat of his master's Korbon Pesach now. The Bavli there says, Mishal Rabohu de lo yochal, aval Mishal atzmo yochal. He's already half free, so he has to arrange Korbon Pesach for himself. You know what he could do? He could arrange to eat Korbon Pesach with his master, chip in, and then be part of the Chavur like any other person. Just now he doesn't automatically eat of his master's Korbon Pesach. It's not assumed that his master has a responsibility to him. By the way, if you'd have an Eved Kanani, technically speaking, has no money with which to, let's say, buy a share of Korbon Pesach from someone else. Why not? Because whatever cash he has is an acquisition of his master, right? Eved Kanani has no individual or no personal property to himself. Kol masha kana Eved kana rabo. That's talking about an Eved Kanani. Whatever he acquires, his master's acquired. Okay, so this is an inference that I put in blue. This is what I call the lenient opinion that comes from the Mishnah. The Chetzio Eved, the half slave, yet to be emancipated by his Jewish master, even though one Jewish master did emancipate him, he eats of his own Korbon Pesach. It means he makes his own arrangement. And then the Gemara says there's a brisa. What do you mean? There's a brisa here that says lo yochal, lo mishalo, velo mishal rabo. This Eved Kanani is actually kind of stuck because he's half emancipated, half still a slave. He can't eat of his master's Korbon Pesach, and he can't eat of his own either. This is a contradiction. This is the Machmir opinion. That's why I put into red. That's from a brisa. So the Gemara answers lo kasha kan kamishna rishona, kan kamishna achrona. This is not such a contradiction. One was talking about a previous state. Okay, one of these opinions, the Mishnah or the brisa, was talking about the previous situation in history, and the other is talking about the later situation. What is the situation? I'll give it to you outside over here. This is a machlokes Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. What to do with such an eved? Why? They both Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel knew about such a case, and Beis Hillel basically said, yeah, so you have a guy in this situation. It means, well, he doesn't have to work on Shabbos. There's 6 days a week. 3 of those days he works for himself as a free person, and the other 3 days he works for his master. He basically splits his time. And Beis Shammai say, well, that's very good, technically speaking, for when he's supposed to work, but he's sort of stuck because he has no wife. Okay? Because he's an Eved Kanani, he is not allowed to marry into the proper Jewish lineages. And because he is half full Jewish now, he cannot marry among the slaves or do whatever the slaves do. Like the Rambam says, the slaves have really no Isur Arayos, right? They're just no Hefker, like the behemoths. So this fellow has no permitted relations. Okay? Who is he supposed to be with now? And by the way, so what's that? Maybe you have a person who's supposed to remain celibate or asexual, and the answer is that's certainly not the case. They bring up the pasuk, which is fine. They bring up the pasuk from where? From Isaiah. Lo tohu bira'ah lashevet yitzara. God didn't create the world so that it should be desolate, tohu, void, null and void. Instead, he wanted it to be settled, which is kind of interesting. Why did they just bring the case from Bereshis, where God turned a world that was tohu and bohu into a populated world and then told people to pru'ervu? Interesting that they bring the pasuk in Isaiah, I guess, because one pasuk that says it, whereas in Bereshis you'd have to bring two pasukim. So Beis Hillel eventually conceded the argument to Beis Shammai and said, you know what? What you got to do is, if one of the masters emancipates his slave, so that now you have a half slave, half free man, the other master must also emancipate him. Beis Din enforces this. So that's Mishnah Achrona. Mishnah Rishona means you'd have cases of half slave, half free men walking around indefinitely. Mishnah Achrona is, if such a case were to develop, then the other master should, as ASAP, emancipate his slave. So he basically stands to be emancipated. A person in this situation stands to be emancipated. So the problem is the Mishnah, the Gemara over here is ambiguous. So we have the situation described in the Mishnah, the permissive situation, and the situation in the Brisa, which is the Machmir, non-permissive situation. And it is unclear which of these is the Mishnah Rishona, which of these describes Mishnah Achrona, first circumstance and the latter circumstance. So here's what Rashi says. Rashi says Mishnah Rishona is before Beis Hillel agreed to Beis Shammai's opinion. Okay, that's so far unambiguous. Lo yochal mishal atzmo b'pnei she'ein chelek avdut nimshach achar dato. This brisa over here, when it says this person, this half slave, cannot eat any Korbon Pesach, neither his master's or his own, it's because he has what? Chelek avdus. He's stuck. He should be able to eat his own. He can't eat his own. Why? Because he still has part of himself is a slave. He's stuck. And Rashi continues, Mishnah Achrona, the situation after Beis Hillel conceded the argument of Beis Shammai, and there's now a takana that the remaining master should emancipate the other half of the slave. It says here, Ho'il uviyadenu l'shachbaro, because now it's within our hands to emancipate him. Harehu kiven chorin v'chel mishel atzmo. So it's already like, because it's coming, he has it coming, it might as well already be considered a ben chorin and eat his own. Ben chorin means a free person, and eat his own Korbon Pesach. So the Mishnah describes the latter situation after Beis Hillel agreed to Beis Shammai, and this brisa was taken from an earlier era when things were not as permissive, and Beis Hillel were still maintaining that you could keep a slave in this limbo period for a while. Make sense? Good. And we described where the root of this, the etymological root of this word over here, l'shachrer, in Mishnaic and modern Hebrew, how it came from Aramaic. Okay, and it used to not have a shin. Okay, and the problem is the Rambam doesn't hold this way. You read Hilchos Korbon Pesach, the Rambam has it sort of backwards, at least from Rashi's perspective. Misha chetzio eved v'chetzio ben chorin. Rambam says you have a person half slave. What does he do? Lo yochal, lo mishel rabov, lo mishel atzmo. He can't eat Korbon Pesach. He can't eat his from his master or from his own. Wait a second. That's the brisa. The Rambam's holding like the brisa, the non-permissive case. Okay? Ad sheyaseh kulo ben chorin. Until he's entirely ben chorin, until the emancipation happens, he can't eat of his own. He can't eat of his master's. Okay? So the Ravid immediately points out, how the Mishnah Achrona ochel mishel atzmo. Why the Rambam doesn't have the halacha? The Mishnah Achrona is like we have in the Mishnah, the actual Mishnah. Mishnah Achrona is an expression meaning latter situation, is described in the Mishnah that he can, which implies, they're not explicit, but he eats of his own Korbon Pesach. So why did Rambam get that wrong? Rambam agrees that the halacha should follow Mishnah Achrona. It's because the Rambam agrees that the Mishnah Achrona is the one described in the Brisa, and Mishnah Achrona is not in the Mishnah with a capital Hey Hayidiyah, with a capital Hey, as we would say, or a capital or the Mishnah. Okay, so the Rambam has it different from the way Rashi and the Ravid has it. So there's some hesber here by the Magia, yours truly, to explain this. The Chuli Alma, according to everybody, halacha Mishnah Achrona. The halacha should follow whatever the Mishnah Achrona is. according to Beis Hillel. Ella shel Rambam Mishnah sheishmiashu rak ochel mishel atzmo. The Mishnah would say that, or hishmiya. Why I say hishmiya? Because it doesn't say in the Mishnah. It's implied. Hishmiya means implied. For the Mishnah that he eats of his own Korban Pesach is the Mishnah Rishona. Shemanichim chatzi eved. The original situation where they would allow this chatzi eved to persist in society. He stands to be emancipated. Okay, he should, because he is a half slave after all. He stands to be emancipated. He should only eat of his own Korban Pesach once he's actually emancipated. Once he gets the writ of emancipation, and it's 100% a done deal. According to the Ravid, Mishnah, the actual Mishnah we saw, which has a permissive ruling, Mishakeveth et uvda lefi ha-Mishnah achrona. The Mishnah, in the corpus, that is, the text of the Mishnah, reflects the situation as it is according to the latter situation. The hoil v'hu amelish tachrer al pi takanas chazal, because this fellow stands to be emancipated by enactment of the sages. He's already considered emancipated. It's a done deal, so he can start eating his own Korban Pesach. So like Rashi says, Harehu given chorin. He stands to be emancipated, and it's Chazal said he's going to be emancipated, so it's already a done deal. Rambam would say the opposite. He stands to be emancipated, but he hasn't yet. We look at we don't look at what should be. We look at what is. The Mishnah Rishona Muvei Kabraisa Useres. The Mishnah Rishona, where these slaves were allowed to persist, is in this brisa that prohibits him from eating any of these Korban Pesach, which is the matzav before the enactment. So where are the advantages of reading this Gemara like Rashi and Ravid? It means that which we find in the Mishnah, the explicit Mishnah over here, is the halacha. Mishnah is the halacha. Okay, that's the advantage. The advantage of the Rambam reads it is that b'derech klal, what's called a Mishnah Achrona, whenever you have this idea that that's the way things used to be, but now the situation changed. We used to paskin another way, and something happened, and now there's a Mishnah Achrona. Usually, what's called Mishnah Achrona does not appear in the Mishnah. Okay, Mishnah Rishona is in the text of the Mishnah, but Mishnah Achrona would be something that is post-Mishnaic. It doesn't actually mean the same for the corpus of the Mishnah. I'm very sorry for a second. And it means that which came up later. So which of these, I don't know. I need someone who's a big bucky in Shas. We're going to go see another example now. Who is a bucky who knows all the Mishnayos Achronos that are mentioned in Shas? And can tell us, but generally speaking, does Mishnah Achrona, is that which was recorded in the Mishnah, or that which is not recorded in the Mishnah? Or is it a Tvasa? Okay, good question. But by the way, this sugya comes up, or a similar sugya comes up right at the beginning of Hilchos Chagiga, and also in the first Mishnah of Chagiga, where you have a similar situation. This reminds me of the usual Chakira brought in Minchas Chinuch. For some reason, the Minchas Chinuch always analyzes two special cases: are they obligated in the commandments or not? The Tum and the androgynous, right? The Minchas Chinuch always brings up, how do they figure, as though this was a common thing in his day, how do they figure with regard to this mitzvah? It's like in every single page, he brings up that as an example. I do not know why. So here, I have a different color coding. When we talked about Korban Pesach, we talked about what is he allowed to do? Which Korban Pesach? Does he eat of his own Korban Pesach, or does he not eat of his Korban Pesach? So allowing to eat of his Korban Pesach was marked in blue. Not allowing him to eat of his Korban Pesach was in red. Okay? Here we have Chayav and Pater. Those who are obligated in Chagiga, or in this case, we're talking about Re'iyah. Chagiga is talking about having to bring the special sacrifice on the holidays, and Re'iyah is appearing before God on the holidays and bringing a burnt offering. We said that person who goes to visit God on the pilgrimages, Pesach, Shavuot, and Sukkot, what is he supposed to do? He's supposed to bring a number of sacrifices. So the main ones are the Re'iyah, just appearing before God. So he brings a burnt offering for God. And the Chagiga is what to celebrate, and that's a Shlamim, right? Shalmi Chagiga. He's supposed to bring a feast offering. Normally, Rambam says a Shlamim is a Toda. Anytime a person wants to give thanks to God. But this is the type of feast offering that doesn't come with so much bread. This is the one they bring on holidays. Okay. So the Mishnah says, Hakol Chayavim B'riyah. I put that in purple. Everybody is obligated to appear before God, pilgrimage. And then he gives the exceptions in the Mishnah. Chutz, Mechera, Shot, V'Katan, Tum, and Androgynous, V'Nashim. Except for the cherish, the deaf mute, and the shota, the person who's not all there, the child, tumtum and androgynous. Tumtum is you don't know what he is, androgynous means of both, and women. They're not obligated in this. And avodim she'enam mishuchrarim, which is sort of I guess, a redundant term, right? Slaves were not emancipated. Of course, if they were emancipated, they wouldn't be slaves anymore, right? Avodim mishuchrarim is interesting. Emancipated slaves means that they're fully Jewish, they're free men, but we're making note of their origin. Why? And to call someone Evan Meshuchrar is very important so that you know that he is a type of convert to Judaism. Converts have special laws that apply to themselves. The Eved, for example, the Eved Meshuchrar has limitations on whom he can marry. So that's why it's important. But you say Eved Sheina Eina Meshuchrarim is sort of redundant because if he were Meshuchrar, he wouldn't be an Eved. Okay? Or maybe that's just the language is there. We're going to see that this is actually the crux of the problem. Is this ambiguous? Is this redundant, or is it not? And the lame and the blind, the sick person, the one who's too old, they're so old that he can't actually make the pilgrimage on his feet. So that's what the Mishnah says. Everybody, generally speaking, is chayav to do the pilgrimage, and there are exceptions, and slaves are an exception. The Gemara there says, included in this hakol, why I say everybody is obligated? It means that even a person who's a half-half, you have a chetzio eved, chetzio ben chorin, he is obligated to what? To also participate in the pilgrimage. Now, they're going to reference over here, like Rashi tells you, a later Gemara. A few pages later, Ravina is going to say, well, wait a minute, that person's already included in what? In the exceptions of those who are patur. That's why I put it in green over here. Let's read this Gemara over here. Jump, because a lot of Gemaras are out of order anyways. We're going to see what Ravina has to say about this. It says here, Nashim avodim she'enam mishuchrarim. They are exempt. Women and slaves exempt from pilgrimage. Bishlama nashim kedamaran. I understand why women are not obligated in mitzvahs. A lot of times we have it. Avodim minalan. How do you know that slaves also not commanded? So they have a connection over here that women don't have to keep the certain mitzvahs and men don't, but instead they say here that the slaves have to go see Ha'adon Hashem. Now we pronounce God's name normally as a form of master, the Lord, right? Shem Adnut. But sometimes he's called the Adon, which is the general word for a master or Lord. And then this is his personal name, even though we pronounce it in the style that invokes his lordship. Okay? So it says you should go on pilgrimage before the master, who is the Lord with a capital L, right? Mi she'en lo ela adon echad, one who has only one master. Who's supposed to go on pilgrimage? A regular Jew who has only one master. Who is that? Well, let's say, take myself. I'm a free Jewish man. I have only one master, the Lord Almighty. If I were a slave, I would have two masters. I would have the Lord and whoever happens to be the guy who purchased me. Right? So those types of people are not obligated. So not including the mitzvah is someone, the slave, who has yet another master. So then they say, why need this pasuk? Isn't there a general rule that the slaves do the mitzvahs that the women do, and they don't do the mitzvahs that the women don't do? Okay. So Ravina answers, Amar Ravina lo nitzracha ela mi shechetzio eved lechetzio ben chorin. The chiddush of the Mishnah, when it says that avodim, okay, are exempt over here, where it hasn't agreed in the Mishnah. Avodim are exempt. Ravina points out in the answer to this seems to be a unanimous. The Gemara likes this answer, that included in here, this ambiguous term, are half-halves. Eved she'eno mishuchrar is referring to a half slave, and of course, if he's a complete slave, he'd be exempt because he's totally in servitude. The chiddush here is that even though he's now been half emancipated, he still has a master, a half master, so to speak, or a master was entitled to half his labor, so he is exempt from the pilgrimage. He falls into the green category. And dekanami, and by the way, so that's the inference you get from this Mishnah. Dekatani nashim va'avadim she'enam mishuchrarim. It says here in the Mishnah, women and slaves who are not emancipated. My she'enam mishuchrarim. What does it mean that they're not emancipated? If it means they've not been emancipated at all, so just say they're slaves. That's what a slave is. He's unemancipated. Elalav shem mishuchram legamre. It means that they're not completely emancipated. It means they're partially emancipated. Whereas a Miracle Max says mostly dead means a little bit alive. Okay, so not completely emancipated means slightly emancipated. So it must mean that when the Mishnah mentions this fellow, Avadim Shena Mishuklarim, it's a reference to the half-halves. So the way the Gemara reads this Mishnah is, everybody, generally speaking, should be attending pilgrimage, but slaves do not, and women do not, and half-halves do not attend either. Half-halves do not attend pilgrimage. Why? Because they still have a master. Slaves don't. Slaves still have a master other than God. And even if they're half-halves, the Mishnah is saying pretty much clear according to the way Ravina is explaining. This doesn't mean Ravina was the first one to come up with this idea. Ravina, who is very late, by the way. When did Ravina live? In the 5th century? Right? Is explaining to us a Mishnah that applied when? Last time it applied was in the 1st century when they were doing pilgrimage. So Ravina lives hundreds of years later, but is explaining to us what the Mishnah is referring. Okay, so that's brought up on the 4th daf over here in Chagiga. And by the way, if you look ahead in the Rambam, he's going to say, like we have this Mishnah explained in Dalid, Amid Aleph over here. Rambam, just to jump a little bit, says right at the beginning of the 2nd parak of Hilchos Chagiga that Amisha Chetzio Eved Chetzio ben Chorin Patur Mipnei Tzad Avdut Shabo. Okay, you would have thought that he's obligated in pilgrimage because he is half free man, but it turns out he's half slave, so that's what prevents him from participating in the pilgrimage, as Ravina explains the Mishnah very clearly over here. Rashi here is going to explain the Gemara. Let's read the Gemara on the first page, according to the way Rashi has it, which is kind of confusing. Okay. The Mishnah, the Gemara asks who's included in this hakol, who has to be on pilgrimage. So the Gemara offers a half-half. He's included. And then the Gemara asks, Ravina damar misha chetzio eved chetzio ben chorin the pater min ariyah. Wait a minute, but we're going to mention that Ravina holds later down here where I'm showing. Ravina says that the half-half is included in the exemptions. He gets a patur, as we say. You just say right here, the Gemara just opens, the half-half is obligated in pilgrimage. And we're going to say that, yeah, but didn't Ravina conclusively show us that the half-half is included in those who are exempt, like the women and regular slaves? So they're going to try to, they actually don't concede this. They say, let's just say you read the Mishnah like Ravina, Hakola tu yemai. Assuming you read like Ravina, so who is included in Hakol? So they say the Chigur b'yom rishon nid pashe b'yom hasheni. He was lame on the first day when the mitzvah started, but he recovered, and now he's able to walk better walk gooder on the 2nd day of the festival. So now you should give his exemption certificate from the IDF seems to no longer be valid. Okay, many of us have such a thing. So the Gemara continues here. This is not necessary for us. I wanted to give another answer. The Gemara says, "Ibay sema lo'olam kid amri meikara." Perhaps what our original suggestion is correct. Amri meikara, that the half-half person, okay, is supposed to be included in in those who are obligated to do pilgrimage. Udkakashilach had Ravina. Your kasha with what Ravina says here that no, maybe the half-half is included in the exemptions. Lo kasha. Kan kamishna rishona, kan kamishna achrona. Really, the fact that Ravina says this, I want to say that the Mishnah actually says. I want to say that the Mishnah says that the half-half is obligated in pilgrimage. And if you tell me Ravina is reading the Mishnah saying he's exempt, it's because we're really talking about Mishnah Rishon and Mishnah Achrona, which is the same situation we discussed earlier. There, it depends. What do we view the half-half as? Someone who deserves to be emancipated because Chazal said so, we assume he's emancipated? Or we're just going to let him persist in the state because Beis Hillel haven't conceded the argument to Beis Shammai yet. Same historical thing. It's not. And the Mishnah goes there that the Gemara gives a slightly different, but basically the same version of events, the argument between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. So Rashi says, look at this Rashi. This is amazing. Mishnah Rishona, Kodim shechazru Beis Hillel oros kedivrei Beis Shammai. Mishnah Rishona means the circumstance when they still allowed half slaves to persist in society because Beis Hillel hadn't seen the argument. Seifa didn't masnisim. The end of the Mishnah, the Katani chutz min avodim she'ena mishuklarim. I don't know why he calls that Seifa, but when the Mishnah says here that avodim have an exemption, the ukma ravina b'misha chetzu eved v'chetzu ben chorin defater, which Ravina says is a reference to a half-half. Okay, a half-half is including the exemptions. Nishneit kodem shechazur Beis Hillel. This statement in the Mishnah is Mishnah Rishona. It's the situation that existed before Beis Hillel actually said, you know what, we shouldn't have these people around. Okay? Avala achar shahodu leveis Shammai. Once Beis Hillel conceded the argument to Beis Shammai, she'eshal Beis Din lachufet adon l'shachro. Beis Din should force the remaining master to emancipate this half-half. Havale ki'ilu mishuchrar. Because we've now made a declaration. Takana. Half-halves will be emancipated no matter what. Beis Din's going to make sure it's going to happen. Okay, they get news. There's a half-half slave going around there. They're going to track down that other master and tell him nicely, emancipate your slave. We've made a takana. And if chas v'shalom he does not go along with what they're demanding of him, they will force him to do so. To what extent will Beis Din enforce their what rules? What means do Beis Din have of enforcing these types of takanas of theirs? Lashes and sometimes imprisonment. Right? They will not put him to death for such a thing because this isn't a murder. Right? This is just these violent takana, but they could do as much as they want to him regarding imprisonment and corporal punishment. Right? So Havale Keilu Mishuchra Kfar V'Chayov. Okay? So now half-halves are Chayov. Even though the Mishnah, really the way you read it, a half-half is not obligated according to the Mishnah. A half-half indeed is included over here in the exemptions because Beis Hillel conceded the argument to Beis Shammai. We don't want half-halves now around. So the halacha is he's chayav. Mishnah shenishneis lo zaza mimkoma. The way we read the Mishnah, we don't change Mishnayos. We still read the Mishnayos. We just know that this Mishnah, as appears in the Mishnah, is Mishnah Rishona, but it is not the halacha. Make sense? Because the halacha doesn't follow the Mishnah anymore, it doesn't mean we're going to change the Mishnah. We have examples like this. But here, in this case, the Mishnah Rishona appears in the Mishnah. Right, which is the way different than the Rashi had in the previous case we were discussing with regards to what Korbon Pesach this half eats. Why? In there, Rashi says the Mishnah Tenu is the halacha, but it's not Mishnah Rishona. The actual Mishnah is Mishnah Achrona. Here, Rashi says the actual Mishnah is not halacha because it's the Mishnah Rishona, and there the Mishnah is halacha because it is the Mishnah Achrona. Very interesting. Rashi is switching around over here. So there's a little inconsistency. In one case, we say Mishnah Achrona is in the Mishnah, and it is the halacha. In another case, Mishnah Rishona is in the Mishnah, and it's not halacha. Interesting Rashi over there. Okay, fine. But of course, Rambam's going to disagree. We saw Rambam says it the other way. The Rambam says that the half-half is exempt, just as the Mishnah, as we have it. The Mishnah Chagiga describes the halacha, which means the Mishnah Chagiga is Mishnah Achrona according to the Rambam. Mishnah Chagiga describes the halacha, which means it's the latter situation. So in this case, wait a minute, is the Rambam being inconsistent? Now, according to the Rambam, the halacha is found in the corpus of the Mishnah. The Mishnah Achrona is in the corpus, whereas earlier the Rambam had it that the halacha is not in the corpus of the Mishnah because the Mishnah changed to the Mishnah Achrona. Okay, so there's a little, both Rashi and the Rambam have fallen into a little bit of a issue over here. So, or as I said, according to Rashi, what's halacha? Eved Kanani is exempt from Re'iyah, but the Chetzi Eved Chetzi Ben Chorin is obligated. Okay, which is the Mishnah according to the Mishnah Achrona. It's our Mishnah and it fits the Mishnah Achrona. So I have a question here to explain the Rambam. The Rambam in this case doesn't hold the Mishnah Achrona and Mishnah Rishona. The Rambam says this isn't an issue of the changing of the halacha. The Mishnah over here in Chagi, which talks about the half-half slave, is as Ravina described. Why is this an Eved Sheina Meshukra? It means a half-half. And the Mishnah always was saying that a half-half is exempt from Re'iyah. Why? As the Rambam says in Hilchas Chagiga, what does he say? It has nothing to do with the Mishnah Rishon, Mishnah Achrona, which talks about what? Will he be emancipated or not? The Rambam says that's a red herring. According to Rashi, Mishnashtenu mitchayeves eved b're'iyah. Okay. The Mishnah Rishona about az tiknu shishtachar. The Mishnah Achrona zo hu up to her kashitas ravina. Okay. The Mishnah Achrona gives him a patur. That's Ravina's opinion. Whereas I have it down here in English, the status of the half slave regarding his obligation of pilgrimage is based on a verse. It's a drasha. Ha'adon, right over here, right? Does he have a master, even part-time, or not? What's a part-time master? Because he's only owned halfway by this master. If the answer is positive, he has a master, he is exempt from the pilgrimage, without regard to the historical issue of the halacha regarding the obligatory emancipation of half slaves changing or not. Whether or not Beis Hillel conceded the argument to Beis Shammai, and now there's a takana that the master has to emancipate him, does not change the status. Does this fellow have a master or not? If he has a master currently, he is exempt from the pilgrimage. So that's an explanation here of the Rambam's halakha. I think it's similar. I think it fits all the evidence we have in front of us in the Gemara, and it doesn't resort to any other, gymnastics. Okay, that's all we have for today. I mean, we could continue going on, but it's getting a little bit late, and we have other things to go to. So, any questions, comments? No.
Yes.
Yeah.
So if, let's say he's a half slave, his second master hasn't been forced to emancipate him yet.
Yes.
So he's a half slave b'isur. So Rashi's idea. I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
The master's doing something. You said b'isur. Yeah. The problem is the master's. He's doing something wrong.
So Rashi's idea is that it's ki'ilu, he's free. So we pretend that he's free. So would all of the things that he's chayavin because we pretend he's free, would that be like from a Torah level? Or is it like an extra takana?
Will we let him kill him, for example? Will we count him for a minion?
Right.
I don't know.
Like, does the takana override the fact that the master still has part control of him?
Would we allow him to get married to a Jewish woman? Now, there is precedent that in such a case he could do kiddushin, but not nisuin. You know, he has a betrothed woman. Matter of fact, that's the interesting case of what's a shifcha charufa? Shifcha charufa is a shifcha kanainis who's been one of her masters already emancipated her. So now she could get kiddushin from a Jewish man, but she has not yet been emancipated. So she's waiting for her wedding. So there is such a case of Evet Kanani already getting his wedding together. But will we actually let him go through with it, have a sheva brachas and a chuppah and a kiddushin, and write up a ksuba while he's in the state? Like Rashi says, Havele keilu meshuchar kfar. Just like he goes on pilgrimage, even though he technically still has a master, because we've already decided that we're going to emancipate him, the Beis Din is going to come and emancipate him. He's already emancipated. I don't know. I guess we should look this up. As I was walking here before, I said, I'd love to discuss these issues. The problem is I then realized that's why we're talking about Eruvin. Eruvin comes up a lot more often. You know, I think every single week we have that Eruvin question. That's a lot more practical. When was the last time maybe we met an Evet Kanani, let alone a half Evet Kanani? These aren't practical. Like the Aruch HaShulchan said, the Tsar put an end to this years ago. And, Lincoln and the Republicans put an end to this in America years ago. And Europe has it. Even the state of Israel doesn't allow this type of thing going on. So very impractical. I don't know what they would do. I don't know to what extent Rashi would follow through with this. But the Rambam is very consistent. The Rambam says as long as he still is a master, even if the sages are intervening and they're going to make him emancipated, until it actually happens, he's still chetzi eved, and all the prohibitions apply. He cannot marry until he gets his get shichrur, is rid of emancipation. He does not do certain commandments until he is actually emancipated. So that's why I like it.
It's internally consistent.
Yeah, so that's why I like it. Like Rav Tzuriel said, the Rambam is the Iker. You always study with the Rambam. Yeah, you can't understand the Gemara without Rashi, but make sure you know the bottom line halacha with the Rambam, because that's what usually makes the most sense and is most consistent. We've now defended Rambam in two cases. We see it, even though Rashi and Ravid understood these two Gemaras, these two cases differently than the Rambam has a wonderful consistency. and makes a lot of sense. Doesn't has less resulting kashas, that make it like, what? Wait, how does that work in real life? What would that lead to? Yeah. Okay, so that's it. We're closed with our prayer that we live to see the destruction of Israel's enemies. Shalom, Yitzchon, of course, the Shabbat Shalom. Be good. See you next time.